You are listening to Productivity Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after productivity coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives entrepreneurs the straight talk on personal productivity. No BS, fluff, or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the Productivity Specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Productivity Straight Talk. Today is episode 293. De-Escalating Conflicts, the fastest and most effective way, with Doug Noll. If you're a business owner who wants to learn effective business strategies, improve time management, and elevate productivity to maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time for what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. Today, you're going to get to meet our guest, Doug Noll. Doug left a successful career as a trial lawyer to become a peacemaker. His calling is to serve humanity, and he executes his calling at many levels. He is an award-winning author, teacher, trainer, and highly experienced mediator. Doug's work carries him from international work to helping people resolve deep interpersonal conflicts, to training life inmates to be peacemakers and mediators in maximum security prisons. His fourth book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, was published by Beyond World Publishing in September of 2017. De-Escalate is now in 4 languages and its second printing. He is the co-founder of Prison of Peace and creator of the Noll Effect labeling system. In 2012, Doug was honored by California Lawyer magazine as California Attorney of the Year. I wanted to talk to Doug about de-escalating because you and I both know that if you've been in business for any length of time, you are inevitably going to deal with angry people. Whether that's angry clients or angry team members, or in fact, we touched on in this episode is that when you're dealing with angry people in your personal life, it can also often affect how you show up in your business and thus your productivity. In this episode, you will discover what emotional invalidation is and how it's harmful, the toxic lie we all believed was true, what emotional competency is and why it matters, the 3 basic emotional competencies worth learning, the 7 different negative emotions people feel and how to use them to de-escalate conflicts, the tremendous power of self-effect labeling, and so much more. Now, before we jump into today's episode and meet Doug, I wanted to let you know that I have something new for you. My team and I have been working behind the scenes to create a quiz, but not just any quiz. We created a quiz that's going to help you identify what's most holding you back from taking your business to the next level. And once you complete the quiz, you will receive a personalized podcast playlist to help you overcome those specific challenges so that you can take your leadership and business to the next level. I invite you to hit pause right now and head on over to take the Next Level Business Owner Quiz. It will take just a few minutes, and once you've completed it, again, we are going to be providing you with a personalized, curated podcast playing list. So if you've come here to Productivity Straight Talk and you've thought, what episodes should I start with? What episodes do I most need to hear? Well, we've got you covered. So head on over to amberdelagarza.com/quiz. Again, that's amberdelagarza.com/quiz. Go take the quiz and then pop back here to listen to my interview with Doug. Welcome back. And now let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Hi, Doug. Welcome to Productivity Straight Talk. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Amber. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So I want to dive right in, but before we do, I'd love to just find out what got you interested in conflict and de-escalation? Like, why do I get to talk to you about this topic today?
Well, Amber, I It's an interesting story, really.
Then give it
I
to
grew up,
us. I'm glad I asked.
I grew up in Southern California, and I grew up with a lot of disabilities, but I was gifted with a pretty good mind, and ultimately uh, attended Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, about as far away from Southern California as you can get and still be on the continent,
Yes.
in northern New Hampshire. And then after college, came back to California. And in those days, if you were in an Ivy League school and you didn't go to med school, you probably went to law school. So I went to law school. And I ended up becoming a trial lawyer, civil trial lawyer in Central California for 22 years. And I won't bore you with all the details, but I basically, through martial arts training, eventually embraced the paradox of Tai Chi, which is the softer you are, the stronger you are, the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. And one day in the late 90s, I was in a courtroom trying a case, cross-examining somebody, and the thought came to me, what am I doing here? Well, to make a long story short, I had a vacation planned after that trial. And during that vacation, I just said, I'm not going to try cases for much longer. But I didn't know what I was going to do. And of course, the universe immediately provided, because when I got back into town, I heard the one and only public service announcement on our national public radio station for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies.
Oh my gosh. It was like the voices coming, right? Like that.
That's right.
Amazing.
That's right. And so I enrolled. And so for 3 years, I was a full-time master's degree student, a 3/4 time law professor, and a full-time trial lawyer. And
wow.
The training that I gained in that program was unbelievable. I was taught by some of the greatest minds in conflict resolution, and they were the people that started the International Restorative Justice Movement, for example. Really brilliant. But the one thing they didn't have was a way to calm de-escalated, angry, emotional people. They were relying on the old active listening, what I hear you saying or what I think you're feeling stuff is from that turned out to be Thomas Gordon's work from the 1950s, which I learned that much, much later. And that didn't work.
Mm.
During my master's degree studies, I had the insight that all conflict has to begin and end in the brain. Peace and conflict is all brain driven. So I started studying neuroscience to see if I could get some insights into what was going on. And this is in the 90s, or late 90s. Functional magnetic resonance imaging technology had only been around for 3 or 4 years. So in those days, you could read every scanning study that researchers were doing. Today, it's 2,000 studies a month. It's impossible.
Right.
And then I had the good fortune to meet John Ullman, who was a professor of neuroscience at Caltech University, not far from where I grew up. And he helped me and tutored me in the basics as a layperson to understand how to read neuroscientific studies, basic brain physiology, anatomy. And so I engaged in this long process of reading many, many, many books, some textbooks and many other lay books by neuroscientists about how we are. And what I learned was that how we think we are as human beings is not how we are at all. Our perceived reality is radically different than how our brains actually function. So
interesting. All I want to say is tell me more. I'm like hooked. Okay.
So all of this came to a head in a conflict I was mediating in 2005. And I was dealing with this divorced couple who, if there had been knives on the floor, there would have been knives on the table, there would have been blood on the floor. Mm. And the thought came to me, listen to the emotions. Out of the blue, I don't know where it came from. And so I did that. And I had them listen to and reflect each other's emotions using a you statement. And when we were all done, the ex-husband put his face in his hands and started to sob uncontrollably. So we let him process, pushed the tissues towards him. He blew his nose, cleaned himself up, and looked across the table at his ex-wife and said, "That's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years.
Oh, my God.
And they settled the case without my intervention, got up from the table, walked out holding hands to have lunch with each other.
Wow.
You could have picked my jaw up off the floor with a forklift.
Talk about changing someone's life with your work and your passion of what you were learning in that moment.
That was the beginning. And 2 years later, a brain scanning study came out of UCLA, out of Matthew Lieberman's lab, And Lieberman and his team did brain scanning studies of people who were they got emotionally aroused by looking at pictures or films, and then studied this process that they called affect labeling, AFFECT labeling. Basically, it means reflecting emotions. And what they saw in the brain was remarkable. When people got emotionally aroused, the emotional centers of the brain, circuits of the brain, basically dominated all brain activity. The prefrontal cortex was completely shut down. But as they were affect labeled, they were told what they were feeling. With the emotional centers of the brain inhibited, and at the same time, part of the brain called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the executive function of our brain, activated. So what was actually going on was that when you were being told or you were telling yourself what you were feeling, you literally de-escalated your brain in less than 90 seconds. And this was the science that explained exactly what I had experienced in 2005. And I said, this is it.
Wow. Gotcha. When you're telling me that, I feel like I intuitively know that, but I didn't understand why. Of course, I never studied that.
Right.
My husband and I often have conversations with my son, who is 13 now, and give him examples of when his emotion takes over. He's not able to think, process, act. And this is even in interpersonal, but also like in an emergency. Sometimes it happens where you're just so emotionally charged, you don't react the way that you would want to because you can't think straight.
That's correct. And this is pervasive throughout human history and throughout humanity. And it's just part of who we are as human beings. I teach that we are not rational beings. There is no such thing as rationality. Every decision we make, every behavior we engage in is emotionally based. What separates us from other species is not our ability to think or rationality. And I defy somebody to give me a working definition of rationality. And so far, no one's been able to do it. That comports to human behavior. There are economic theories of rationality called rational choice theory, but those theories are used for studying very far removed from reality situations. But we're emotional beings, and no other human being, no other species of animals have emotion. For example, my little dog who's sleeping behind me does not have emotion. She has affect. We are born with affect, but we have to learn how to create emotion.
Okay.
And so we start that process of creating emotion as cognitive constructs at about the time we start to verbalize, 18 months of age. And it's our brain's job as part of its developmental process is to learn how to associate all of these different affective experiences, feelings of pleasantness and unpleasantness, with words that represent different kinds of experiences. The problem is that because we have been basically lied to for 4,000 years about this myth of rationality, we look at emotions as being evil, sick, or weak, or irrational, right?
Right.
So we deny our own rationality, and more importantly, we engage in one of the most insidious, pervasive forms of childhood abuse that exists. And that's called emotional invalidation. So you got a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
13-year-old boy?
Yes.
Okay, so let's imagine back when he was 2 or 3 years old, and he was out running around, and he falls over, scrapes his knee, starts to bleed a little bit, and starts to cry. What was he told?
I would just ask him if he was okay.
That's good.
Yeah. You going to be okay? What happened?
Would anybody ever tell him, stop crying? It doesn't hurt? Oh,
no.
Okay.
No, not at 2. Yeah.
You're lucky, because most people, and including myself, have had the experience of when we were children and had emotional problems. We were told not to feel what we were feeling. Our emotions were invalidated. So it would be stuff like, don't be a drama queen. Put on your big girl panties. Stop crying. Oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Don't make such a big deal out of it.
Yeah. I can totally see that happens a lot, for sure.
It happens a lot.
Yeah.
And what the science shows is that it stops emotional maturation at about between 6 and 8 years old. The emotional brain stops maturing in those situations. And this is the vast majority of people suffer from this. So by the time they become adults, they have intellectually matured, cognitively matured, but they have the emotional maturity of a 68-year-old. And we do a really good job of hiding that. Now, the problem is that when we get into an emotionally difficult situation and we don't have any skills or training, we immediately, and our emotional centers take over, we revert back to the last highest state of our emotional maturity, which is 68 years old, which is why when you see a 40-year-old getting really upset, you say, well, he's acting like a 6-year-old. And then that's exactly what he's doing. He's
Right.
6 years old.
And is that just so I'm following with you, is that because they haven't learned to process their emotions or identify their emotions properly in that moment?
Right. They have not developed emotional competency, which I distinguish from emotional intelligence. So
Can you tell us the difference? Because we've had a lot of people on the podcast talking about emotional intelligence. So I'd love to hear your take on the difference.
Most people don't have a clue about what even researchers don't know what it is. Emotional intelligence is a test. It's an assessment. And the term emotional intelligence was coined by three scientists, Jack Meyer, Meyer-Salovey, and Caruso. University of New Hampshire, Yale. I don't know where Caruso was. I think Salovey's now the president of Yale. This was done. They were doing these studies in the late 1990s, and they were looking at they were trying to identify different kinds of social intelligences other than IQ, cognitive intelligence. And so they started testing, and they began to see that this thing they called emotional intelligence, you can actually test for it. And so the gold standard test is now called the MSET, which is the Myers-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. And if you take that test, you will score you on where you are, just like IQ, like the Stanford-Binet test. It will score you on your emotional intelligence test. But like any test, you can't learn a test.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's why you can't learn emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is simply a measure of emotional competency. You can learn emotional competency.
Okay. So I hear you on that one. And then I would say, I'm glad you followed that up with you can learn emotional competency, because I can tell you my journey. I didn't have that language, but I would always say I've gotten way better at emotional intelligence would be my language. Didn't know the difference.
That's right. Well, the reason that this becomes important to understand the difference between emotional competency and emotional intelligence is if you truly want to increase your emotional intelligence, then you need to learn certain skills. And the three basic competencies of emotional competence are, number one, emotional self-awareness, being aware of your own emotions and being able to speak what they are. Number two, emotional self-regulation, which is the ability to regulate your behavior against the emotional experience that you're having in the moment. And competency number three is what is called cognitive and affective empathy. And it turns out that affect labeling, telling somebody what they're feeling, is cognitive empathy. And what's really cool, and I've tested this over 13 years of field testing in some of the darkest places on the planet, maximum security prisons. What's really cool is that when you teach somebody how to affect label, they almost automatically develop emotional self-awareness and emotional self-regulation.
Is that because if they're taking the time to see it in other people, they can reflect on their own emotions a bit better?
Exactly correct. And they learn how to calm another person, and that teaches them how to calm themselves, because when you self-affect label, you calm yourself down too. And that automatically builds the other two competencies. So learning emotional competency is really, really easy, and it's very fast. My clients can typically master this in 6 to 8 weeks of practice.
Wow. So again, I didn't have the language. It's just life experiences, and you can only teach your children what you know in your life experiences. Right. But to go back to your question of like, what would I have said to my son that, scraped his knee? I mean, it's been variations throughout his life, but I can tell you, the last, I would say 5 years, I ask him all the time, like, what are you feeling right now?
Okay.
What's going on for you? Because he's gets quiet, or he'll it shows in one way or another in behavior. And I always say, like, what are you feeling? And sometimes I don't know what that is. Well,
Right.
if you could put a word to it, if you could explain what happened that made you feel how you're feeling. And I know it's just an exercise of us being able to identify the broad spectrum of emotion, because I wasn't asked that by my parents. I was a full adult. Someone could hurt my feelings. I could start crying and they'd say, "What happened?" And I'd say, "I don't know." Like, it just happened. And so that was part of my own journey, is identifying how I felt, the emotions, putting labels on them.
Which is why when I teach, I say, when you're confronting somebody who's really emotional or upset, and it doesn't matter, let's just say it's a negative, intense series of negative emotions. I tell my people, never ask people what they're feeling.
Interesting.
Because when they are highly emotional, they're in a condition known as alexithymia. Alexithymia. And basically that's the prefrontal cortex is cut off because of the emotional, overwhelm from the emotional part of the brain. And it's cut off from the emotional database that we all have. Some have a very robust database. Most people have a pretty weak database. But when people are alexithymic and they're really upset, they can't access that, and all it does is make them more frustrated and angry. Did you ever see?
Okay, so I hear that. And let's say you're doing this not just with my son, but you're doing this with a significant other, or even a client, right? That is really angry and upset. My head goes, but what if you label it incorrectly? What if your labeling is offensive to them?
Number one, it's never offensive, ever. See, this is why it's so counterintuitive.
Okay.
No one of the tens of thousands of people that I've taught this skill, I have never had a person come back and report to me that somebody they affect labeled found it to be offensive. Sometimes they get pushback, but that's for a different reason. But what the experience is that the speaker feels deeply heard and validated in a way that he or she has never experienced before. And I call it listening another person into existence.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number two, our brains are hardwired to read the emotions of other human beings. And this goes way back into evolutionary biology, which I can go into if you want me to, but trust me that we're hardwired for this. Okay. The problem is that because we privilege rationality over emotions, we've never learned how to develop the skill. But it's a skill that's innate in every human being. And once you start learning the skills, and I'll describe how to do this in a moment, our brains are extremely accurate and extremely fast in recognizing emotion. And I make it even easier I have created a matrix of emotions. Emotions come in layers. So there's 7 layers of emotions, and you learn the matrix. And that covers every single emotional situation you're going to ever come across.
Okay.
So if somebody says, or something you might get fairly commonly is something like this, I'll say, well, Amber, you're really pissed off. And you'll say, no, I'm not pissed off. I'm just frustrated. Like
yeah. I want you to role play this.
I'll say, oh, you're really frustrated. And then I'll go somewhere else. I'll go, so you feel really disrespected. You feel completely ignored. Nobody's listening to you. Feel completely unappreciated and unsupported. And you'll say, yeah. And I'll say, and you're really anxious and concerned and worried about this. Yeah. And you're a little embarrassed. Yeah. And this is really making you sad because you're losing connection with other people. And it's distressing. Yeah. And you feel completely abandoned and all alone. And you feel rejected and betrayed. Yeah. And you're really pissed off. Yeah. The reason that I said, you're pissed off. And you said, no, I'm frustrated, is because you couldn't connect the emotion of anger that you were experiencing in that moment with the word anger, because your brain was your prefrontal cortex was overwhelmed by the emotion of an anger. So by me labeling 10 or 15 other emotions that you're experiencing in the same moment, you come down enough that now you can reconnect. And when I relabel it, you can say, oh yeah, I'm really pissed off.
Okay. Would you do some role play with me so that I could get this let's do a setting of.
Before we do that, let me explain what I'm doing, because
go for it.
So the trick here is 3 steps. Ignore the words. Do not listen to the words. Number 2, read the emotions. Number 3, reflect back the emotions with a simple you statement. That's the process.
Okay. So okay, ignore the words.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean words of like, I'm mad because you didn't hit this deadline. I can't believe your employee never called me back.
That's right. There you go. Exactly.
So
ignore all that. You don't need to
ignore that. Then how do you read the emotion to that?
You just sit in silence and empty your brain. Try not to think about anything. This is effortless, and let your unconscious brain process the emotional stuff. Now, I've got a way of fast tracking this. So I very quickly, the 7 layers are anger, disrespect, fear, shame, disgust, sadness, and abandonment. Now, after each one of those major layers, there are a whole bunch of words that we can, of different types of intensity that we can put. So, for example, on the anger layer, the top layer, it could be anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, rage, hatred, jealousy. On the disrespect emotions, it could be something like disrespect, unfair, being not heard, ignored, not being listened to, being unsupported, unappreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And so forth. Anxiety, the fear emotions would be fear, anxiety, worried, concerned, scared, terrified. Next level would be disgust emotions, disgust, horrified, appalled, nauseated, words like that. The next layer would be shame, embarrassment, guilt, shame, embarrassment, guilt. I'm drawing a blank. There's one more. And then we get into the sadness emotions, would be sadness, grief, feeling distressed, upset, sad, unhappy, depressed. Mm-hmm. And then the abandonment emotions, which is the feeling of being abandoned, rejected, unloved, unlovable, and stuff like that. So the beauty about structuring emotions in this way is that we can access that information very quickly. When the brain has structured information, it can access it. If it doesn't have structured information, it has no access. So when I'm teaching this in my coaching and my workshops, I'm teaching people how to access these emotions in a very structured way. Having said that, now watch how it works. Give me a role play of something, any situation, I don't care. Something you want to.
Okay. I'm calling because your team members were in my house and they broke one of my important pieces of furniture, and I'm not doing good at role play. There's no emotion there for you to read. So
Amber, you are really frustrated and pissed off. You're really pissed off. You're frustrated, and you're really anxious. But really, you feel completely disrespected. You feel like people really didn't care about you or respecting your home or your furniture, and it's just enormously frustrating. And you don't feel appreciated or supported by the people that came over to do the work, and you're sad. This was a really important piece of furniture that has a lot of memories associated with it, and it's sad to you that it was broken and really defiled. And you really feel like you were, in that moment, you were completely abandoned and rejected by the people that you hired to come in and do the work. And the whole thing just really pissed you off.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. And so you're saying de-escalate, right? And so then from there, you can't get, like, angry is off the table, and now be like, well, what are you going to do about it? Where do we go from here, right?
So Amber, how can I make things as right as possible for you?
Uh-huh. And really, even in the role play, I'm like, there's nothing you can do. I just wanted you to know that it was wrong.
All you wanted to do is be heard.
Yep.
You will solve 100% of all customer-client relationship problems just by doing this. I guarantee my students and clients that they will never have another fight or argument again in their life once they master these skills.
Wow.
Never again. And you will be able to walk into any confrontation, any intense situation, and know exactly what to say, when to say it, and how to say it, and be utterly confident and calm, collected, and most importantly, compassionate in any situation. Doesn't matter.
That's great.
That's how
Okay.
powerful stuff is.
I actually needed to role play that with you because as you're telling me the steps, I'm like, what do you mean you don't listen? But you did listen to the words. You just weren't addressing the words because you reused the words like your furniture was important to you, which is an important fact that I shared, but your focus was around the emotion around the furniture.
Right. The reason that I say ignore the words is because we tend to focus on the words too much and the words get us triggered. So some typical responses to that kind of conversation.
Right.
My guys didn't break the furniture. They didn't tell me any about this. Who the heck do you think you are? You know, or they could say, well, I'm so sorry. You go into an immediate apology, which is a big mistake. And or you try to jump into problems like, oh, I'm so sorry, Amber, what can we do to fix this? Or, well, we have you signed a contract that said that you waived all rights against us and you released us from liability. So tough beans, lady.
I can see all those scenarios. It's not going to make a repeat client, not going to make the rest of the relationship
on the other hand,
better.
if I listen to you and reflect your emotions like we did in the beginning, I say, wow, these guys really get it. They really understand. And I don't have to apologize because just by listening to you, I've shown that I care. And that's all people want. That's all they want. They just want to be listened to.
Right. I mean, and that is why they called in the first place, was to be listened to, right?
They want to be listened to.
So when you're doing this, are you saying every time you're going down the whole 7, like you get to abandonment every time, whether it's a little thing? Okay. I just wanted to check. I'm like, geez, that seems like a lot for a piece of furniture.
That's right. But I just wanted, it was as a demonstration. But basically, in non-personal relationships. So, for example, a business to a customer would be, or a professional to a client. You can easily go down to the fear emotions. So, well, you could actually you could do a little sadness too. The shame, embarrassment, guilt, that level is
super personal. I was thinking the same thing when you were going down it.
Yeah, the way I talk about it is how invasive is it? So when you're starting at anger, that's the least invasive. When you get down to abandonment, that's the most invasive. And so I teach my students how to use discernment. How do you know how invasive to get? And it's always going to be contextual. And it's going to also be based on your confidence and experience in listening to and reflecting emotions. I can go anywhere with anybody at any time. I mean, when I work in I field tested all of this in maximum security prisons. I mean, for 3 years at Corcoran State Prison in California, I taught guys coming out of gangs, all in for life for murder, 100 feet from Charles Manson's cell. I mean, I've been in the darkest places on the planet.
Why did you choose to test it there?
The Story of Prison of Peace which is the project, and people can check it out at prisonofpeace.org. It started with a letter from a woman serving a life sentence without possibility of parole in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world at that time, Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California, not too far from where I live. And I got a call from my very dear friend and colleague, Laurel Crawford, who's a lawyer and mediator in Los Angeles, saying that she'd received this letter from Susan Russo. And in the letter, Ms. Russo asked Laurel if she would be willing to come in and teach the women serving life sentences how to become mediators to stop the prison violence, because they were tired of it. They knew they weren't getting out. And the prison guards were instigating violence. And I mean, it was a pretty horrible situation. And
so they were invested in their community, wherever that might be.
Exactly correct. So Laurel called me, one, because she knew me as, a peacemaker and a world-class trainer and a secondary black belt and a lawyer. And she and I had known each other for a number of years. And I lived fairly close to the prison. And so she read the letter and said, what do you think? And I said, we should do this. So it took us 6 months of working through the prison bureaucracy before we finally got the permission to start. But we started it in April of 2010 with 15 women, all of them serving life and long-term sentences. And the very first skill we teach is reflective listening, which is mirroring, paraphrasing, core messaging, and affect labeling. And that's when we even in that first group of women, we saw dramatic personality changes in 5 weeks. I mean, dramatic.
Wow.
Unbelievable. And
I'm sure you're teaching them things they never learned from their parents or whomever raised them. in their life experiences.
That's correct. So we stayed in that prison for 3 years. Just as we were able to make it self-sustaining, we trained up a bunch of incarcerated women who were going to be trainers. The state decided to pull the plug on the prison and convert it to a men's prison. So those women went to the two other women's prisons, one across the street and one down in Southern California. And we followed them. And we, to this day, we have programs going in those prisons. And then we were asked to come into the men's prison. Now, this was all pro bono. We weren't getting paid a dime for this. And at first we said no, but finally we said yes. And we came in and we started the whole project all over again with men. And then it wasn't Valley State Prison for women. Now it was just Valley State Prison, VSP. And that's been one of our most successful programs. And it's still going strong today. And that program started in 2014. So it's been it's been about 10 years. Then we had applied for grants from the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And finally, we were about to give up the project because we were going broke doing this. We both gave up our careers to do this.
Wow.
And finally, we started getting grants. And one of the grants we got was to do this on the 4-yard at Corcoran, which is the Supermax yard for gang debriefing and guys coming out of gangs. The department thought, well, this would be interesting. Let's see how good this really is. And it was incredible.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I asked how this got started.
So today we're international. We've got prisons all over the world. During the pandemic, we filmed our entire curriculum, and we're testing the best way to deploy it now. And then next year we'll be basically making it available to any institution in the world because we can subtitle everything. And it'll be available to anybody who wants to start Prison of Peace, and you won't have to have a lot of training because it's all on video. And
right, it's like train the trainer virtually. You'll be able to. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing that's really cool. Two really cool points about this. In the filming of it, we brought in our trainers from the people who were incarcerated who had been released on parole, and we brought in our best trainers, and they're the ones that are doing the training and the demonstrations in the video.
Really?
It's so cool.
That is really neat.
And the other thing that I'm really proud of is we have had over 600, 700, maybe 800 of our students released on parole in California. Not one of them has reoffended.
That is great.
0 recidivism. They're all doing great.
What an investment. Okay, so if it can work there, it can work out in...
I have also taught at the Congressional Budget Office in Washington, D.C. I've trained senior analysts at the CBO how to de-escalate members of Congress and staff. And I've gone back twice to train their analysts how to de-escalate these crazy people.
And so now I believe you've written a book and you're doing this training for companies and corporations and outside of that work, right?
Schools, companies, anybody. This is a foundational skill of life.
And so if, my listeners are all business owners, they're all small business owners for the most part. And they're like, okay, I get this. Like I heard Amber role play. She was a little skeptic. It worked. Okay. So what's next? Because before we actually hit record, I guess we should let our listeners in on what we were chatting about briefly. And I had just shared with you, the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because of the connection with productivity. And I think a lot of people might find that unexpected, but the truth is, as I speak to business owners day in and day out, so much of their time and energy is sabotaged by conflict or trying to avoid it, the immense amount of energy to avoid conversations, or you plan your day and it takes one call that goes off the rails and that's it.
I will give you back 40 hours a month.
Okay.
40 hours a month I'll give you back of your time. That's the average time that a business owner spends on dealing with conflicts and dealing with difficult conversations. I'll give all that back to you. If you learn skills,
that's amazing. And
it's incredible how much time is. If you spend, just think of it this way: you only spend 1 hour a day dealing with a conflict, either within the business or with a customer or with a vendor. That's 5 hours a week times 4 is 20 hours a month.
Yep.
And that's light. If you've got 2 conflicts a week, now all of a sudden you're up to 40 hours a month that you're spending on this.
Yeah. And you mentioned just, how many conflicts in the professional setting, but, it's not as black and white as our personal lives and then business. So if you have conflict in your personal life, it again can sabotage your ability to focus and show up your best.
That's right. And what this will do in your personal life is it will reconnect you with your children, and it will reconnect you with your partner, and you'll have a kind of intimacy you never even dreamed of. It's really powerful. I've saved a lot of marriages with these skills.
I can totally see that. I can see that. Starting with being at the table of the divorce, not that you saved the marriage, but you saved the relationship. That was an amazing story that kind of set this off. And I was intrigued as you were telling that whole story is how did you apply this into law where it's traditionally all conflict, right? That's when you get attorneys involved.
I left the practice of law in 2000. I left $10 million on the table and walked away from my law practice. 1 week's notice. To
pursue this
work.
And have you seen an opportunity to train, I'm just curious, train attorneys so that they can also do what you did at that table?
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to Omaha, Nebraska in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, let's say middle of August 10th. I'll be training, I think they told me they had something like 150 or 200 lawyers and judges that want to be trained in this. And we'll do a whole day work. We do it my standard format, which is an all day workshop. And then we'll do 4 follow-up sessions on Zoom, weekly follow-up sessions. So the people that want to continue to learn will meet once a week for 4 weeks.
Okay. And, so the little bit of research I did, I know that you have an online program. I watched your video on your website, so you can share a little bit about that. And you have a book. And I believe you also have a podcast. So if you want to share about that so that our listeners can be like, oh my gosh, what would that feel like? Actually, I want to say, what did that feel like? You get that much time back. And just to circle back, my thought was, and more joyful. Could you imagine if you weren't avoiding conflict in your business, how much more joyful that experience can be?
Right. So first of all, in terms of, let me talk about the things that I offer. I offer there's online courses on de-escalate, how to de-escalate, pretty basic. And then there's a basic and advanced course in emotional competency, how to become emotionally competent. And the core of that course is learning how to affect label. But we go into a whole bunch of other things about how to really learning how to understand anger and deal with angry situations. So if you like doing it, learning yourself, then the online courses are relatively inexpensive and effective. I also obviously do workshops, but I don't come in and just do a one-off for a day. My clients commit to a workshop, either virtual or in person, for 1 or 2 days. And then we have anywhere from 4 to 8 weekly follow-ups via Zoom. Because I found over the years that it takes that accountability and support over a period of time for people to really to adopt these skills. Mm-hmm. I do individual coaching for people who want to get individualized training, which is a lot more obviously personal. I'm working with a number of individuals right now who, my favorite person is a woman who's an OBGYN doctor in Texas, who's got a practice that's just crazy. And so she's learning how to manage, she's learning these skills to manage.
Yes.
Really powerful. And obviously I'm available. I can speak. My 4th book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, is available on Amazon or anywhere else. Simon & Schuster was the publisher. So put in Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL, De-Escalate, and the book will pop up. Yeah. It was an Amazon bestseller, which I'm quite pleased about.
Congratulations. I can see this skill being powerful for business owners that went to school for, you're a doctor, you're an OBGYN, and now you have a practice and you have your entire team of employees, a whole building. And you're like, right. When did I wake up and lead all these people? And, right. When did I have to answer to all these complaints and challenges? This right. is a good skill set.
These skills allow you to be the leader that everyone wants to follow. I think the most important leadership skill is empathy. And that doesn't mean you're soft or that you're a pushover. It means that you're human. You are emotionally competent. You're authentically vulnerable and authentic, and people can really relate to you. And people love you because you listen them into existence, both employees and vendors and customers.
Yeah. I'm thinking as you're saying that too, like, could you imagine with the culture leading by this and empathy and, validating emotions in the workplace, which is not traditional, that if it starts at the top, that's going to be mirrored to other people on your team and in your business.
It will change the company culture rapidly. And what's the beauty about if you're a business leader or a business owner, everybody's looking to you and they're going to model whatever behavior you display in your organization is what everybody else is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start modeling this form of cognitive empathy and start displaying these forms of emotional competency, within weeks, everybody else is going to be doing exactly what you're doing.
Excellent.
And so that's how you change company culture. It's just
I love
change your behavior.
All right. So is there anything you want to share with us as we close out? I know you shared how to get the book, but if you want to share your website and any last comments around the work that you do.
So in the show notes, there should be a link to a webpage that the only people that are going to get to that webpage are people that are listening to this show. Nobody else is going to see it. And I think I
got it. It's dougnoll.co.
Right.
/productivity-straight-talk. And again, you don't need to remember that when you're listening. We will definitely have it in the show notes.
Right. You can reach me by my email at Doug, D-O-U-G, at DougNoll, Noll.com. That's my email address. And my website, obviously, DougNoll.com. And the website has a whole bunch of information. I've got over 240 articles I've written on all these topics. My training courses are on the website. And when you go to the homepage, it asks a series of questions. What are you here for? And just clicking on the question will direct you to parts of the website that will be of most interest to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this great conversation and really teaching me something new today. So I really appreciate your time, Doug.
You're welcome, Amber.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode and conversation with Doug. I personally found it incredibly insightful, and I had many of my own ahas. I often think about emotional intelligence, and now I know about emotional competency. And I do understand that it plays such an important role in our own productivity, because when we can regulate our own emotions, when we can handle situations that are uncomfortable and we can handle them effectively and then get back to work, is a great way to show up our most productive selves. I need to be straight with you. No change, no change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. So my question to you today is, based on my conversation, how will you handle the next conflict or angry person? I for sure know that I will be handling it different. I will have a different perspective on how to handle somebody that is coming at me, that is angry. And I am so thankful to have those tools in my toolbox, and I hope you do too, so you can take action. Before we close up today, at the top of today's episode, I invited you to take the Next Level Business Owner Quiz. If you have not done that already, I will invite you to do so right now. Head on over to amberdelagarza.com/quiz. Take a few minutes, answer the questions, and let me help you determine what's most holding you back, and then providing you with a personalized playlist that you can go to with resources, ahas, lessons, strategies that can get you unstuck so that you can take your leadership and business to the next level. And before we close out, if you are new here, welcome. Be sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And if you've been here for a while, I would love to hear from you. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please leave us a review and share the episode with a friend. So that's my straight talk for today. Until next time, have a productive week.